Okay, hello everyone. So now we're just going to discuss the pre-class 2. So the last pre-class, in the last pre-class we have discussed about the topics like prehistory, then Indus Valley civilization and the Vedic period primarily. Chalcolithic was also included there, megalithic was also included there. So all these chapters we have already done. Now this is pre-class 2 and primarily speaking there are 3 chapters of ancient Indian syllabus is part of it, and these are the first is Mahajanpada period, the second is the Mauryan period, and the third is post-Mauryan period. So there are 3 chapters, but I must tell you all these chapters are very important. Why they are important? Because one question you can expect always from the Mahajanpada period. One question you are definitely going to expect from the post-Mauryan period, and the Mauryan period also, like let's say alternative years, you can find the questions even from the Mauryan period also. So since these 3 chapters are very important, and that's how you should have a good hold over these these chapters, because if you are having a kind of good command over it, in that case you all are going to excel like with respect to the marks in this particular section. At the same time, I must say that since in this particular, all the 3 chapters that I did tell you, except the Mauryan period, both the chapters, like the first one, that's Mahajanpada period, and the next one is post-Mauryan period, is very conceptual. Now these 2 periods are known for some greater changes. There were some greater changes which had been taking place in this period, and the moment or the period where you find there are certain transformations, I must tell you that these transformations are making any particular period very important. So this clarity should be there in your mind, that whenever there is some transformation, some change, in that case this part becomes very important. And mind you, whenever the changes are there, since the changes are never happening in a secluded way, like one change can lead to the another change, and the another change, what exactly I want to say, that if you talk about the political change, it may lead even the social change, religious change, economic change. So ultimately they all were interconnected and the linked. That's the reason because of what you have to be very you have to be very conscious in such kind of chapters. So basically when the things are like this, in that case they could become experimental. If the changes are like this, in that case they could become experimental. By experimental, what do I mean? Basically I want to say that they can really create some constructive questions from this part, and only once you are having a good understanding, then only you will be able to do justifications with the answers. That's the reason it's very much required, right? So now we'll be just seeing that what are the important dimensions that we need to cover. So for that I'll be picking up the first topic, that's basically like which period, that's the Mahajanpada period, right? So when it comes to Mahajanpada period, right, so the first topic is the Mahajanpada period. Mahajanpada period, right? Understand it with respect to 3 greater changes which are happening here. That's it. The first change, important change, is about the second urbanization. Second urbanization. The second change was state formation. The third change was religious revolutions, right? These are 3 major changes, and mind you, these 3 changes were so much powerful, they were so much powerful that it had left impact even over the various other dimensions of this particular period. So when it comes to second urbanization, this particular change itself was so powerful that it could have left impact over this, okay, and even over this also, and that's the reason because of what I had been telling you, that the things are ultimately interlinked or the connected. So since they are connected, so now as far as this second urbanization is concerned, right, now second urbanization is, that after IVC there was a sort of ruralization, there was de-urbanization. The whole Vedic period more or less remained de-urbanized or remained rural, though it's a debate among certain historians, those who believe that towards the end of the later Vedic period some sort of urbanization had already started. Because if you refer the later Vedic texts, specifically I am talking about the Samhitas, rest of the Samhitas, like rest of the Vedas, and then Brahmins, Aranyakas and Upanishads, in that case certain terms like Pura, Nagaram they started appearing very frequently. But whether they were the cities in a true sense or not, that may be subjective. So there is one section of historians, those who believe that the urbanization process started even in the second, even in later Vedic period. On the other hand, there are certain other scholars, specifically the Marxist one, they do believe, right, they do believe that urbanization started only in the Mahajanpada period, because in their discourse it is getting fit only in the Mahajanpada period, because there is a assumption that in the Mahajanpada period the society is going towards the lower Gangetic plains or the middle and lower Gangetic plains, and all these ideal conditions were there which could have helped them to create huge amount of surplus. And then undoubtedly, once the communities have reached to that part, the middle and Gangetic plains, undoubtedly they had the chance or the scope to create huge amount of surplus. And you all know that as per the Marxist interpretation, surplus is one thing which creates many, which creates or which brings many changes in fact. So they are trying to see everything with respect to this. On the other hand, specifically the historians which are falling in the category of rightist wing, they believe, even in the Vedic period, this process had started. I think there is a midline also, and you should always understand this midline. And what is that? That it is not true that from 6th century BC, the period which is considered to be the beginning of Mahajanpada period, from that day only everything had started. I think it's quite impractical. Like it is quite possible that towards the end of the later Vedic period and the beginning of Mahajanpada period, this transformation was gradually happening. धीरे 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 changes जो है वो शुरू हो गए हैं, और यही reason है कि the sense of urbanization might have developed even in the later Vedic period, but the proper cities could be noticed only in the Mahajanpada period. Why? Because I did tell you about the changes, right? So it's about the second urbanization. Now when the moment it comes to second urbanization, you all understand, because while having the discussion over Indus Valley civilization, I just tried to discuss about different features of urbanization, and there I told you there are certain prerequisites which are very much important, and if they are not there, in that case urbanization seems to be quite impossible. And one of the most important criteria is surplus, because you can see that surplus leads the other changes as well. So how come the surplus being produced? Of course, this is one important thing, and you all understand. And with this surplus production, there is another idea which is related, or the debate which is related, and that surplus production is related to this iron debate. And in fact, you must have studied this iron debate. You must have studied this iron debate. You must have studied about this iron debate in your text also. So what is this debate all about? Whether iron was also responsible for this or not. Other factors are definitely there, such as fertile soil is there. Then you can talk about good rainfall, and then alluvial soil, good rainfall. All these things are there. But the Marxist historians, Kosambi, R.S. Sharma and D.N. Shah, they all are leading historians, those who had been putting emphasis on this dimension, that iron was also as one of the core factors. Look, they are trying to understand it with respect to many things, such as iron was iron was precisely present in the Jharkhand area. They are moving to this part because of the iron. So they are coming to this part. Iron helped them to deforest this area. Okay. In the deforestation of this area. And then what happens? They had started making the tools also of iron, and that also helped them to create great amount of surplus. Look, this is not very surprising that of course iron does help the agriculturist communities in order to produce more. There are multiple benefits of it, like it's not necessary to get that much deeper into it, but it is helping us. But the other historians such as Makhan Lal is there, the Nihar Ranjan Ray is there, these people are saying, actually the proper deforestation of this area happened only in the colonial period when the railway tracks were being put here. Or else they are saying that when this sugarcane cultivation became very popular in the modern times, because sugar became one of the most important commodities being consumed by the people, and that's the reason it happened slightly late. So it's a debate. There is no conclusion as such, and don't ever try to conclude it also, because this is an open-ending thing. There are two different wings of historians, and they have been saying it differently. So whether iron had a role or not, there are certain historians giving their argument in order to prove the role of iron. On the other hand, there are certain historians, they do not give this much credit related to iron. And in fact, they are saying that as far as iron is concerned, that was even accessible in the later Vedic period, and there are certain iron mines near this Gwalior, and these are being accessed by the later Vedic people, and that's how iron was something which was not completely unknown to them, rather it was known to them. Got it? So that's why we can say this is one debate. Apart from this urbanization, you understand it's about the population increase, it's about the heterogeneity, it's about the trade and commerce, it's about the great amount of development in manufacturing and all. So this is how there are multiple developments coming in this part. So whenever you see the urbanization, you need to see it with this particular perspective. Got my point? Then the second change is state formation. There are 2-3 different theories, and you have to understand it with respect to this only, right? And then third, it comes to the religious revolution. I'll be coming to them once again. Religious revolution. So religious revolution, though it's not right to say religious revolution, I personally believe that it should be called as religious revolution, because yes, there was multi-dimensional change because of the birth of all these religions, but at the same time the other perspective also may be to see the birth of many religions and the sects. So this is also one thing, right? So as you all can understand, there were 3 greater changes had been happening here, and that's how this period becomes very important, right? So now let's see the questions that have been asked in past few years that can really help you to understand that what kind of questions are being asked from this part. Let's see it. Yes, I'm just enlarging it. Yes, I think it's visible to you. In past few years, the questions, in how many questions? Just 5 questions have been asked in past 2014, 5-6 years only, they have asked this many questions. Now the questions are mostly related to what? Buddha's teaching. Okay, it's related to Buddha's teaching, right? Okay, then how far it is correct to say that the changes in the post-Vedic economy gave birth to the new religious movements? Again, it's related to birth of Buddhism, Jainism. Examine the relationship among economic growth, urbanization and the state formation. That's a very constructive and a creative question. There are 3 important things that happen here, and it's asking simply to find the correlation among them, right? Then again, Buddhism and Jainism were social movements. It's a dimension I have been covering in my classes since very beginning. I knew this question had to be asked, and finally in 2017 they asked this question. Give an account of the Ganasanghas. This is the question related to the polity. Now why am I telling you about all this? Because you see the questions, and ultimately majority of the questions are coming from this religious revolution, urbanization, the one question has been asked in past few years, one question has been asked from the economic growth and the kind of linkages between urbanization and state formation. And then it comes to the economy and religion, that was also much. I have already told you that the creativity will be at in its apex when it comes to this particular chapter, as the historians do have scope here to frame the questions, to link one dimension with the other dimension. So these kind of questions are normally being asked, right? So now I think you are getting a rough idea that in which dimension you have write the in which dimension you need to write the questions, right? Just a second. Sorry for the interruption, right? So you can see the nature of the questions, right? Now I would be focusing that what are the ideas that you need to focus. Iron debate I have already discussed, right? Iron debate is something that I have already discussed, right? So yes. Now first it is about second urbanization. So if any question is coming on second urbanization of this particular period, what you need to write? I think you don't need to be very puzzled as such. Like the same model, the urbanization model that we have discussed or you have studied, urbanization model that you have studied, like the same thing you have to write here also, right? But the example should change. If it is related to this, in that case, like you all know about the features such as surplus is one feature. I'm not writing all, okay, surplus is one feature. Now only by writing this, that surplus was being produced by the Mahajanpada societies does not resolve your problem. You have to give certain examples also. How, on what basis you have been claiming this, and mind you, here the reference of any source is really putting the weight in your answer. And then when people ask you where exactly we are supposed to use the sources, like this is how you are going to use the sources. The moment you have been giving any argument, if it is substantiated by any source, then there is a weight in it, and I think this is the best way of writing the answer. Got my point? So sources, like what are the sources which are giving us. You can refer the PDF that I have been uploading. You can find all these things in the PDF. The surplus, like surplus, one source. Then let's say you are writing like heterogeneity. Okay, heterogeneity is there. Like again one source through which you can talk about it. You talk about the class configuration. Okay, you can again refer one source. You can talk about you can write about the manufacturing and all. Again one source, like you have been referring Jatkas. Let's say you talk about the trade and commerce. Okay, again one source that you have been referring. So basically all these ideas and should be supported by the fact. So this is how fact matlab sources, right? So this is how you are just going to write about all these things, and that's how you are going to prove yes, undoubtedly it is the second urbanization, and this urbanization continues further also. Let's say precisely if you have been writing answer on the urbanization itself, in that case you need to continue it, like even for the later period, and you have to write ki gradually this continued till the postmodern period, and the apex of this urbanization was coming on in the postmodern period, right? So that's how you're just going to write about this dimension. So this dimension is very straight. Now what content is required, I did tell you very precisely, and there should not be any confusion ki surplus and the sources, right? Surplus and the sources are the best best thing, not sorry surplus and the sources, sorry, matlab all these features and the sources, the best way of conveying your idea. That's it. Now it comes to the next part. Okay, surplus is not a very complicated area. Okay, then it comes to the state formation. That's the most important thing. Now when it comes to state formation, very clearly I should tell you about two dimensions in which it may be asked, right? So what are these two dimensions? One, like is the state formation itself, the formation of state itself, and the second is about the Ganasankhas. गणसंख्या, यही दो डायमेंशन है जिसमें से ये क्वेश्चन पूछ सकते हैं, तो इतना कॉम्प्लिकेट करने की जरूरत नहीं है. व्हेन इट कम्स टू स्टेट फॉर्मेशन, नाउ व्हाट आर द थिंग्स दैट यू नीड टू राइट फॉर द स्टेट फॉर्मेशन? अगेन इट्स वेरी सिंपल, राइट? व्हेन इट कम्स टू स्टेट फॉर्मेशन, you have to write about certain theories, right? So there is one theory which is related to directly urbanization, that whenever the urbanization is there, now there is a genuine requirement of the state. This you must have studied even you must have studied even in urbanization also. The way it has been, this argument has been given ki in the state formation what happens, in the state formation, since there is a heterogeneous society, and this heterogeneity may be social, it may be economic, and this heterogeneity rarely brings the requirement of the state. The way the coins are required, sort of regulation in the society is required, law and order was required. So one ruling authority was required. It's not necessary that authority is going to be proper state as such, but yeah, we can say ki it can begin that process. So this is one idea. The second idea for the states for formation is very simply, this is the Marxist idea which is talking about the conflict in the society, right? Now the conflict may be of two kinds, social conflict, and the second is economic or the class conflict. So the moment the conflicts are coming, the resolutions are very much important, or resolving these conflicts are also becoming one important dimension, and that's how one ruling class is coming, and this class was also getting the support by the huge amount of surplus got created by the society itself. Now if that surplus won't be there, in that case the people the masses would not have reached to that level of paying the taxes on a regular basis. But since this surplus allowed them, and in fact yes, like you can also mention here, when you talk about class, you have to mention about the private property. So basically private property is also something which really pushed them to go for a ruling authority. Got my point? So everything is interlinked, right? And in fact, if you'll see the process of state formation, you can find that this process is a very natural and the gradual process. Okay? Once the smaller state got formed, that you have seen in form of 16 Mahajanpadas, like 16 Mahajanpadas, and out of 16 Mahajanpadas, there were 2 were Ganasanghas, 14 were the monarchical one. So I'll come to that part later on. So yes, so these things are ultimately interconnected, right? And as like question, I hope you remember, that has been asked in 2017, which is asking about the interrelationship between urbanization and it, right? So I think this is what I have been telling you, that whether it is asking or not, you have to understand the state formation with respect to this only. That's the best way of understanding it. Got my point? So urbanization, and that's how it is. Got my point? So this is how you can see the formation of state, and that there is a third theory given by Rumila Thapar is about the lineage theory, right? What is this lineage theory? This is a new argument, and C doesn't fall directly in the category of Marxist historian as such. C believes that C is coming from the NR school, which is the French school, ठीक है? अब ऐसा नहीं कि आपको मैंने कहा तो आपको इसके बारे में जानना भी है. NR स्कूल थोड़ा आप अगर अकेडमिक्स में पढ़ते हैं तो वो आपको अलग से पढ़ना होता है, बट ठीक है, यहाँ पे इतनी इंपॉर्टेंस उसकी नहीं है. यहाँ पे आपको ये याद रखना है कि लीनियज थ्योरी, वो लीनियज थ्योरी में सी इज सिंपली ट्राइंग टू से कि अल्टीमेटली इट इज़ द फैमिली, right? Within the family, gradually the conflict. She also talks about the conflict only, but she doesn't talk about the conflict at the broader level, like social conflict or the class conflict. Okay, I'm so sorry. Social conflict. I think we can take this Varna in form of social conflict, right? And like this is how the Marxist historians are defining the state, kind of early state in the later Vedic period, when they are saying, ki, look, this social conflict was something which has which has brought the need of a kind of state, since the surplus was not being produced by that society, and that's how this state could not become consolidated, whether it's happening in the Mahajanpada period. That's how they have pushed forward their argument, right? Now when it comes to lineage theory, it talks about the same conflict, but not at a broader level within the family itself, because the moment the concept of private property is coming up, that has been creating the fraction. I hope you remember that initially the concept of like joint family was there. And in this joint family, the fractions started appearing because now the land started becoming the private property, and that's how the families which are remotely connected. Now these families were actually thrown out of the system. They were not allowed to basically enjoy any kind of ownership over it, and they were being treated as labor. So these people have started migrating from this region to another region where they had the possibility to enjoy the ownership, and that's how expansion, the conflict. And ultimately, like C has divided the family into two categories: the senior lineages, the junior lineages. The senior lineages exercise better control over the land or the private property, and that's how the state is emerging, because the way the power extended, like ultimately they converted themselves into state. This is the next theory, right? So this is how all these theories had been given, and which is called as, this is how the state formation is happening, right? So the moment any question is coming to the state formation, you need to divert this answer towards what direction? You have to divert it towards basically that direction, what I was telling you, the theory, right? Basically you have to deal it with a theoretical, in a theoretical way. That's how you are supposed to do it. Okay. Next is the important development is the religious revolution, and as you have seen, the majority of the questions are coming from this part only, religious revolution, right? Religious revolution or development, whatever you say. Now in this particular part, it may be very complicated, right? I must tell you, because when it comes to pre-examination, in the pre-examination these days they have started excusing like this particular topic. इतने सारे सवाल निकाल के लाते हैं, और वो भी इतने इंटेंस, इतने अंदर जाके निकाल के लेके आते हैं कि लोगों को इसने डरा दिया. But let me tell you one thing very frankly, when you have been dealing with this subject in the history optional, this is the easiest part. You have to just understand couple of things of it, right? So one thing like that's related to the origin of it, right? So when it comes to origin, the origin can be related, again it can be divided into two ways, okay? And one, that's the rightist wing historians explanation, and then rightist wing and then the leftist wing. ये दोनों अलग अलग तरीके से इसको करते हैं. Rightist wing is seeing simply as a development which is related to the increasing dominance of Brahmins in the society, the way that things were getting more and more complex in the society. So they are seeing it in this way. When it comes to leftist wing, like they do accept all these ideas, but at the same time they are also saying along with this, there are certain change in the material world or the material life of the people was also responsible for the birth of it. I am not going to explain it because I believe that most of you are getting this idea, because whatever the books that you have studied, I hope you must have studied about this, okay? And otherwise you can refer the notes also. So basically the rightist wing and the leftist wing, right? So these are two wings, like two wings of historians, those who have been trying to explain it in different way, right? That's how you are going to deal with the origin. Now this could be connected when the question was asked, when you had been asked to connect it with the economic sphere, that is this explanation. When you have been like never leave the answer like incomplete, I must say if only this dimension has been asked, in that case elaborate this but write the counter arguments in the conclusion. When both the dimensions have been asked, like give them equal space. When this dimension has been asked, in that case elaborate this dimension, but in the conclusion you write the counter argument also. That's how the answer should be always balanced, and this is the thing that you are going to learn gradually, but it's important, mind you, right? Okay, and then after it, okay, after it there was one more thing that is that can be asked from here, that basically Buddhism and Jainism as social philosophy. Now as I did tell you that I kept on teaching this particular thing since beginning, that over the period they will definitely ask this question. So I very usually say Buddhism and Jainism were less religious philosophy and more social philosophies. You should always consider one thing, that as far as Buddhism and Jainism is concerned, in the initial period, like it was not true that they had been taken as religion. अगर आप ऐसा सोचते हैं तो गलत सोचते हैं. अगर ऐसा होता और जिस तरीके से चीज़ें एक्सप्रेस की गई हैं किताबों में, उस हिसाब से लगता था कि पूरा इंडिया जो है बुद्धिज़्म और जैनिज़्म में कन्वर्ट हो गया. अगर वाकई ऐसा होता, इन दैट केस यू मस्ट हैव सीन द ग्रेटर नंबर ऑफ पीपल फॉलोइंग बुद्धिज़्म एंड जैनिज़्म इन इंडिया. और अगर आपको लगता है कि देयर वाज सर्टेन एफर्ट्स फ्रॉम आउटसाइड बिकॉज ऑफ व्हाट इट हैपेंड दैट बुद्धिज़्म एंड जैनिज़्म बिकेम कंप्लीटली एक्सटिंक्ट, आई थिंक इट्स अ मिस्टेक दैट यू हैव बीन डूइंग. अगर ऐसा होता तो शायद हिंदुइज्म भी खत्म हो जाता, बट ऐसा हुआ नहीं. Actually, Buddhism and Jainism started flourishing more like a philosophy, ठीक है, more like a philosophy. It was not putting that much emphasis on the concept of salvation, and that's how their concept of nirvana was very different. Like this, you have to always keep in mind. I can give you some example to make you understand in a better way, such as you must have seen about Brahma Kumari Samaj, Gayatri Samaj, and there are many more such Samaj, some very popular, some are less popular, but you can find that these philosophies are there, they do believe in a different kind of principle, but it does not mean that they have gone beyond Hinduism as such. नहीं, ऐसा नहीं हुआ कि वो Hinduism के beyond चले गए. इसीलिए the idea of conversion, not only in this period, even in the next period, modern period, has become very subjective now. Like the way initially we used to say that Ashoka converted into Buddhism. So idea of conversion has been questioned seriously these days, and that's how while reading about Buddhism and Jainism, always think in this way that this is, of course it was a kind of religion. If it was not a religion in the initial period, later on their followers converted it into a religion. But there was no as such great amount of separation between Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism as such. वो है, थोड़ी rivalry भी है, थोड़ी बाकी चीज़ें भी है, but देखिए रिलीजन का आइडिया अपने आप में एक ऐसा आइडिया है जिसको हम जिस तरीके से आज देखते हैं वैसा था नहीं एक्चुअली में, ठीक है. इट वॉज नॉट समथिंग विच वॉज वेरी कॉन्क्रीट एज सच. If you are thinking it's a very concrete idea and people were always thinking in terms of religion, I think that's a wrong assumption that you guys are having, right? So change it. So basically it was a philosophy primarily. What kind of philosophy? I believe I prefer to say it more like a social philosophy, because in various ways or through various ways it had been trying to change the society, right? So there are many things which are resolved by it that you must have studied in the book that you have studied, that whatever the books or the content that you have studied, you must have studied this part also. The way they were helping the state, the way they were helping the society to flourish, they were helping the economy to flourish. They had been challenging the Varna division. Why? Because they had been challenging it in a very different way. At one hand, they retain it also, but they have minimized the frequency of this Varna system, that society could come together and work together, because it was very much required for the economic prosperity. The idea which had been created by the people in the later Vedic period was not very convenient for this society, and that's how it has been challenged. So in many ways, they had been trying to help the society to flourish, right? Specifically, the material prosperity it had tried, right? And in fact, you do have many examples. Buddhism is more fit in this criteria, and that's the reason Buddhism became more popular as compared to Jainism. But in a later run, something else happened because of what Jainism remained in this country, whether Buddhism got completely extinct. That's a different dimension, right? So undoubtedly, it's a social philosophy, right? But at the same time, there are some counter arguments also, and this you need to remember, the counter arguments. Counter arguments. Now, what is this counter argument? Like whatever they have tried, they were not very successful in doing so, or proving it very simply. Yes, there were certain limitations because of what it was happening. Okay? When you become revolutionary, dealing with the ideas, dealing with the revolutionary ideas is very simple. But when it comes to the actual implementation, that always becomes tough. They had been talking about many different kind of liberation. They talked about the lower caste liberation, lower women liberation, right, and many other things. But ultimately, they had been failing in all the fronts. Let's say like counter arguments, majority of the Brahmins could be noticed here in Buddhism and Jainism. And in fact, the joining of Brahmin was very much glamorized or glorified even by in the Buddhist writing, because they believed, look, this Brahmin is also joining it. It meant that they were also finding the Brahmin people very, Brahmin people very, very, very religious people, the scholar people, and that's how it was a kind of pride issue for them if any Brahmin was joining them. So gradually that number of Brahmins were increasing here, the nature of it was also changing. Women liberation, it was definitely discussed, but there was no massive achievement in this. Lower Varna liberation, again it was something which had been discussed, but there was no great change as such here. So this is what you need to keep in mind, and other things also you can discuss. So there are many points, like in all these points you can really find about this, all these dimensions, and you can give the counter arguments also. So both the perspectives are there here that you need to keep in mind. Majority of the questions are coming from this dimension. So this is what you need to remember for this particular part. Only these dimensions. One more dimension that I missed to tell you, and yes, that's about basically Gana Sanghas. ठीक है, ये मैं भूल गया था. Gana Sanghas के बारे में again, ठीक है, like when you have been writing any answer on Gana Sangha, always write that it is not only historical, not historical, but also political debate. The nationalists, since in the ancient Greek and Roman world, there used to be some Ganasanghas. थोड़े democratic या republic feature मिलते थे. वो भी पूरे रिपब्लिक या डोमिनेट डेमोक्रेटिक नहीं है, हो ही नहीं सकते, क्योंकि एंशिएंट टाइम्स में लोगों को इतना इन सिस्टम्स के बारे में पता नहीं. इट्स अ मॉडर्न सिस्टम, राइट, बट देयर वर सर्टेन फीचर्स बिकॉज ऑफ व्हाट इट वाज बिलीव्ड इन दिस, right? The second reason that the European scholars had been continuously criticizing Indian society for having a despotic rule that was called as the Oriental despotism. That was also something which is highlighted or emphasized a lot by the European scholars, and then the nationalists wanted to counter it, right? So it's simultaneously a political debate, and it was even raised by many freedom fighters also. So this is the reason because of what it should be seen first with this perspective. In the beginning only you should make it very clear, ठीक है, कि आपको ऐसे ही इसको देखना चाहिए, and then it comes to the Ganasanghas. Now there are two things. What are the features because of what we have been calling it Ganasanghas? And the second thing that you should talk about, the second thing is really related to basically the counter argument. आप एक ही क्षत्रिय क्लास की डोमिनेंस देखते हैं, like you find the dominance of Kshatriya class. The property was being owned by Kshatriya. The ruling class was the Kshatriya class. Brahmins were missing here. The lower caste were missing here. Lower Varnas were missing here. If they were present, they were not getting any share in the administration or the power as such. So you can't say like surplus was not present here, which could have really created or brought the fractions in the society. These are certain dimensions in which you can give the counter arguments also. That's also one thing that you have to keep in mind, right? That's all about this. So I hope that you got the conceptual ideas of this particular period, the concepts which can really help you to understand, which can really help you to understand these topics, and at the same time it can also help you in answer writing, because the way I presented these ideas, it's sufficient enough to help you or to give a right dimension to your answers, right? Okay, so now there are 2 more chapters left, and they are Mauryan period and the post-Mauryan period. So that we'll be discussing in part B discussion, right? So thank you very much. We'll be meeting again in part B, and we'll cover the remaining 2 chapters. Thank you.